Good day, I'm junior researcher Adam Southgate, and today's lecture will be covering the Entropic spheres Umbra D. I'd appreciate that all hunters please subscribe as to not miss any future lectures, and also, if you could, recount any of your own interactions with the monsters of the spheres in the comment area of this video. So, to begin, as always, we'll start with our general announcements. Firstly, regarding the contract last week relating to the test program dealing with the Cuckoo Fairies. The team, led by We All Witnessed, thankfully arrived just in time as the young changeling was further along in their maturity than first surmised. The night after the team's arrival, Test Subject 4 left her parasitized adoptive parents' home in the eerily silent manner of such beings. The report written by We All Witnessed after the fact describes how the young changeling almost seemed to glide over the ground, her feet, while still making the actions of steps, simply brushing the pavement beneath her, not actually bearing any weight. This is typical of Fae within the fairy variety, but only becomes apparent within the Cuckoo Fairies once they've reached the cusp of full maturity. The team, maintaining their distance, followed Subject 4 for 2 hours as she travelled away from the village and into the hills further up the valley. We All Witness describes how the grotto was located against the side of a small hill, the entrance hidden behind brambles that he surmises the parents forced to grow using their basic magics to conceal their home. The team easily eliminated those within while they were enthralled devouring the 16 years worth of human material that had built up around the body of Subject 4. Secondly, an emergency contract relating to the perpetual tear in Snowdonia National Park. The team, attempting to further understand the bizarre subsphere, set up an experiment to view the Homo floresiensis. A squad of 3 security personnel and 2 researchers conducted the experiment. We are only aware of how the experiment proceeded up to a certain point, when the radio was abandoned. A deer blind was carefully constructed within the local woodland. The blind was big enough to fit the 5-man team along with their equipment. The plan was to damage one of the trees with the screaming response to summon a group of Homo floresiensis, then retreat to the blind where they could be observed in safety. From their communications, the plan worked well to a point. The Homo floresiensis did indeed arrive, though each were covered in fleshy eye-like growths all over their bodies, seemingly randomly spaced. The Homo floresiensis appeared agitated, searching the surroundings for, we assume, what damaged the tree. The researchers then communicate back to base how the many-eyed beings begin to calm, with one walking up to the damaged tree, placing his hand upon it. At this point, an expletive can be heard, we think from one of the security team. The researcher, who had been relaying messages back to their base, then states, "The trees have eyes." Another voice can be heard then in the background saying in a very distressed tone, "They're all looking right at us." This is the last we've heard of the 5-man team, with the preliminary investigations finding the blind torn open. We require an 8-man team of journeyman hunters or higher to volunteer to go through the tear with 2 gamekeepers to investigate what has become of the missing team. This will hopefully be a search and rescue mission, but more likely body recovery. If you are interested, please contact your local order office. The name Umbra D comes from the Latin word for shadow, umbra, and the Welsh word for black, D, arranged in the Welsh way with the subject shadow being placed before the descriptor black. So the true translation would be the black shadows, and the literal translation would be the shadows black. The Umbra D are one of the many forms the benign spirits that surround us that at one point flooded into our sphere can take. Like many such entities, they are governed by one primary emotion that the individual the spirit has sought to emulate was feeling at the moment of their death. While ghosts are a little more difficult to define, we know that wraiths, for example, are built upon the emotion of rage. This feeling, along with the individual's mind before their death, defines the being that is formed. As with the Wraith example, the being will only be capable of experiencing shades of that soul emotion. The intensity may change, but the feeling will never die. This state of affairs obviously doesn't lead to a healthy mind for the entity, with the more volatile emotions often creating the more dangerous entities. The same is true of Umbra D, however, their driving emotion may surprise those of you who have faced them before: loneliness. Information about the transformation from benign spirit to any other kind of entropic entity is spotty at best, with a violent or traumatic death being the only through line. What we've been able to deduce is that in the case of Umbra D, the individuals the spirit mimics after their transformation are those that die alone, though again in pretty extreme circumstances. A good example, and how this was first put together, came from a case in 1825. The individual, one Sarah Stewart, having become pregnant out of wedlock, was sent to a nunnery under the misinformed notion that she would be taken care of there until the baby was born. Sarah, after the birth, was separated from her child, the baby being taken immediately to the nunnery's orphanage. Sarah, though exhausted and suffering blood loss from the difficult birth, attempted to stop the nuns from taking the child. A fight broke out, with Sarah eventually collapsing from the strain her body had gone through. The nuns took Sarah's unconscious body below the nunnery to a windowless dark room with a heavy old oak door with an iron lock on the outside. Their plan was to wait until the baby had been adopted, then to release Sarah. However, this did not come to pass. The nunnery burned down shortly after, with all inside dying in the flames. All except Sarah, who had been buried alive within the cell beneath the rubble. We truly aren't sure how long she survived beneath the ruins, though the scratch marks carved into the oak door being as deep and blood-stained as they were, I'd guess for longer than is pleasant to imagine. Years later, the ruins were excavated, and 2 of the 4 people that entered Sarah's room would never be able to move their own bodies again. You see, Umbra D, driven by loneliness, yearn for any kind of connection. However, they are completely incapable of touching the physical world, though they can touch shadow. In fact, they are, in a sense, shadow. More specifically, to see an Umbra D, you would first need to look at a darkened surface, literally a surface without direct light upon it. Within the shaded surface, if you look long and closely enough, and one is present, you will see, a fraction of a shade darker, a silhouette. This is Umbra D. Only able to exist within shadow, Umbra D see light upon a surface as we would see a solid wall, impassable. They will find a shaded spot during the day to remain within. This spot can be millimeters in size without causing any issue. Then, as darkness falls, they can move freely around wherever isn't directly touched by a light source. Their speed within their 2-dimensional world appears to vary depending on whether or not they are actively being witnessed. While being watched, they seem to move as any human would, though on a 2D plane. However, when not witnessed directly, there appears to be no limit to the speeds they can achieve, almost seeming to teleport through connected shadow. As predators, though that word doesn't truly apply as they are simply desperate for any human connection, they are horrifying. They will attempt to grab your literal shadow and pull it away from your body. Now, while this sounds a little Peter Pan, the results are devastating. For the lucky, those that notice what's happening and react in time, they may only lose a limb from their shadow. This will cause the individual to lose all feeling and movement of the corresponding limb. For the unlucky who do not notice, their shadow will be taken, and they will lose all ability to use their own body. Unfortunately, in many ways, their body's autonomic functions still continue, keeping the victim alive. For the luckier victims of Umbra D, these incidents do not have to end their careers, as the Pinocchio program offers the Pinocchio frame. The Pinocchio frames are wooden exoskeletons that fit over the affected limb. Just as the prosthetic, the frame is powered by a wisp crystal that taps into the autonomic nervous system to interpret what the individual would do with the limb in any given situation, then moving to fulfill the action. Sadly, for the truly unlucky, the frame, just as the prosthetic, requires some movement to extrapolate what it should be doing. For example, a nearly fully paralyzed person, only able to move their jaw, would be able to use a full-body Pinocchio frame, as the wisp crystal only requires a single signal to be able to estimate what the person would do and mimic the actions. For those unlucky victims of Umbra D, they are completely incapable of purposely moving any part of their bodies, therefore the Pinocchio system will not work. This highly depressing fact is what led to the IDs and the SHs within your files, or immediate death and St. David's Hospice, or as many of you hunters refer to it as, the I'm dones and the small hopers. For those newer among you, once a hunter reaches the rank of journeyman, they will be asked by the Order, in the case of situations like the worst case scenario with Umbra D, whether they would like to be put out of their misery, the IDs, or whether they would like to be cared for and kept alive at St. David's Hospice until hopefully a treatment can be created, the SHs. This is obviously not an easy decision, and it's a question I do not believe has a correct answer, only a personal one. Frustratingly, the loss of bodily control is not the worst part of losing your shadow to Umbra D. We are unsure of the mechanics of it, but the shadow taken by Umbra D will itself become Umbra D. Whether this new entity is literally the shadow given sentience, or a new spirit turned with the shadow acting as a catalyst, we are unsure. Strangely, for those who have lost their piece of, or their whole shadow, they are literally incapable of casting a shadow with the affected area. Light still hits their body, they can still be seen, however, at the same time, light appears to pass through their body as if they weren't truly there. Both these incompatible truths appear to transpire simultaneously, turning the victim into a living paradox of physics, a being that shouldn't, but is. But how does one safely deal with such a being? We at the Order suggest employing the light trap method when tackling Umbra D. Specifically, once the target is located, a trap must be set. Using an ecologically irresponsible number of lights, one must find a room with 0 windows and only 1 door within the location Umbra D is inhabiting. Once located, create a path between the outside and the room with the lights for safety. Remember, light is your armor when dealing with these creatures. Now able to freely bring equipment into the room, you must set up a system of spotlights within the room that you have full control over. The aim is to create a net of light of sorts that Umbra D cannot pass through. This is where I should remind you that the floor and ceiling are also important in this and must also be lit. Once everything is in place, turn off the lights and use yourself as bait to lure the entity into the trapped room. After they enter, immediately close their escape with the first spotlight covering the door they entered through, while also activating a second light directly above you to shield yourself. Using a third and fourth spotlight, shrink the available space for Umbra D to move within until there is nowhere else for it to go. At this point is when you finish the hunt by simply shining a spotlight directly on the entity. It should only take 10 minutes for Umbra D to completely fade away into the light, though this is rather a distressing thing to watch. Umbra D are not evil, cruel, or wrathful. All they seek is connection that they can never actually experience, and due to what they are, this is a fact they can never understand or learn from. They are pitiable things that deserve our sympathy, but not our mercy. Whether intentional or not, they cause the highest degree of harm, and while it would be possible to capture these entities, and it has been done in the past, this would only serve to heighten the entity's inherent pain and serve no benefit to ourselves. Sometimes what we do truly is a kindness. But I will leave it there for today. With Arthur's might and Merlin's wisdom, thank you.